There is a kind of love that looks like friendship. It smiles at you, it sits beside you, it laughs at your jokes and holds your hand when you cry. But underneath, it is rotting. Underneath, it is watching, calculating, wanting everything you have. And when it finally decides it has waited long enough, it reaches for something ancient, something that should never be touched. This is the story of Mia Collins, a girl who loved too openly in a world where not everyone who smiles at you wishes you well. Mia Collins was 22 years old when her world began to fall apart. She was studying at a university in the city, literature. She loved books the way some people love breathing, quietly, constantly, without thinking about it. She had dark eyes and a laugh that filled rooms. She was the kind of girl people gravitated toward without understanding why. There was something warm about her, something genuine. She had two people she called her world. The first was Ethan. Ethan Carter was 24, tall, quiet in the way that made people lean in to hear him. He had been Mia's boyfriend for 2 years, and in those 2 years, he had never once given her a reason to doubt him. He brought her coffee exactly the way she liked it. He remembered small things. He was, by every measure, a good man. The second was Sarah. Sarah Mitchell had been Ethan's best friend since childhood. They had grown up on the same street, gone to the same school, shared the same group of friends. When Ethan started dating Mia, Sarah had welcomed her with open arms. Warm hugs, long phone calls, shopping trips, late-night coffee and conversations that lasted until 3 a.m. Mia trusted Sarah completely. That was her first mistake, because underneath Sarah's warm hugs and late-night conversations and genuine-looking smile was something else entirely, something that had been growing for years, quietly, in the dark. Envy, pure, patient, poisonous. Sarah had loved Ethan before Mia came along, not as a friend, not as a sister. She had loved him the way you love someone you have decided belongs to you, silently, obsessively, without ever saying it out loud. And then Mia arrived, and Ethan looked at Mia the way Sarah had always wanted him to look at her. Sarah smiled. She hugged Mia. She said all the right things. And she waited, and she watched, and the envy grew. There is a part of the old city that most people avoid after dark. Narrow streets, old buildings leaning toward each other like they are sharing secrets. Shops with no signs, doors with no handles visible from the outside. Sarah knew about this part of the city. She had heard about it the way people hear about things they should not pursue, in whispers, in passing, in conversations that stop when you enter the room. She went there on a Tuesday night in March, alone. She found the man she was looking for in a small room behind a cloth shop. He was old, older than she expected. He sat behind a low table covered in objects she did not have names for. He did not seem surprised to see her. He did not ask her name. He simply looked at her and said, "Who is it?" Sarah reached into her bag. She pulled out a photograph, Mia's photograph, taken without Mia's knowledge, a candid shot from a university event. Mia was laughing in it, eyes bright, completely unaware. Sarah placed it on the table. The old man looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at Sarah. "What do you want?" he asked. Sarah looked back at him without flinching. "I want her gone," she said. The old man was quiet. "Gone how?" he asked. Sarah had thought about this. She had thought about it for a long time. "I don't want her dead," she said. "I just want him to stop loving her. I want her to become someone he can't stand to look at." The old man picked up the photograph. He studied it. Then he named his price. Sarah paid it without hesitation. She walked home through the narrow streets, feeling something she mistook for relief. It wasn't relief. It was the feeling of a door opening that can never be closed again. It started on a Thursday. Mia woke at 2 a.m. She didn't know why. There was no sound, no nightmare she could remember. She simply opened her eyes and was completely, instantly awake. The way you are when something has touched you in your sleep. She lay still for a moment. Then she got up. She walked to her dressing table, sat down, picked up her comb, and started combing her hair. She didn't think about it. It felt natural. It felt necessary, the way drinking water feels necessary when you are thirsty. She combed slowly at first, then faster still. By the time she stopped, 20 minutes had passed. Her scalp was tingling. She looked in the mirror. Her hair looked the same. She went back to bed and forgot about it by morning. The next night it happened again, and the night after that. Each night a little faster, each night a little longer, each night the comb pressing a little harder against her scalp, dragging, pulling, scraping. By the end of the first week, Mia's pillow had dark strands of hair on it every morning. She told herself she was stressed, university pressure, nothing more. She bought a new, softer pillow. It didn't help. Ethan came to visit on a Saturday afternoon, 3 weeks after Sarah's visit to the old city. Mia opened the door and he smiled, and then the smile changed. Something moved across his face, something he tried to hide quickly, but not quickly enough. Mia's hair, which had always been thick and dark and long, was visibly thinner. Not dramatically, not yet, but enough that he noticed. The part in the middle was wider than it should be. The ponytail she'd pulled it into was thinner than he remembered. "You look tired," he said gently. "Are you sleeping okay?" "Fine," Mia said. "I'm fine." She believed it. They spent the afternoon together. Coffee, a walk, a movie they half-watched while talking. Normal, good, the way their afternoons always were. But Ethan watched her when she wasn't looking, and he felt something he couldn't name yet, a low, quiet worry sitting in his chest like a stone. He called Sarah on his way home. "Have you noticed anything different about Mia?" he asked. Sarah's voice was warm, concerned. "Now that you mention it," she said slowly, "she did seem a little off the last time I saw her. Tired, maybe, but I'm sure it's nothing. University stress." "Yeah," said Ethan, "probably." He hung up. Sarah sat in her room and smiled at her phone. By the 4th week, it was undeniable. Ethan came to visit again, and this time there was no hiding the shock on his face. Mia's hair was gone, not thinning, not shedding, gone, in patches, unevenly, cruelly, the way hair looks when it has been pulled rather than fallen, and her scalp, the skin that should have been beneath it, was raw, red, in places openly wounded, small cuts, scrapes, like something had been dragged across it repeatedly. "Mia," Ethan said, and his voice came out wrong, too quiet, too careful. "What happened to your head?" Mia reached up and touched her own scalp, and she winced at the tenderness. "I don't know," she said, and she genuinely didn't. She had no memory of the nights, She woke every morning with her comb on the bedside table, sometimes in her hand, and a dull ache across her scalp, and no explanation for either. Ethan took her to a doctor that same day. The doctor examined her carefully, ran tests, ordered blood work. Everything came back normal, perfectly, inexplicably normal. No infection, no deficiency, no dermatological condition, no explanation. The doctor referred her to a neurologist who also found nothing. Mia sat in consultation rooms and answered questions and submitted to tests and received the same answer every time. Normal, normal, normal. She went home alone each evening and sat in front of her mirror and looked at the ruin of her hair and her wounded scalp and thought, this is not normal. What Mia didn't know, what she couldn't know because she remembered none of it, was what was happening between midnight and dawn. Her neighbors knew. The family in the flat next door had started closing their windows at night, not because of the cold, but because of the sounds. At first, they thought it was a television left on too loud. Then they thought it was a phone call, someone laughing hysterically, singing fragments of songs in a voice that sounded almost, but not quite, like Mia's. Then they thought it was something else entirely. Because the sounds didn't follow any pattern, they shifted, laughter becoming crying, becoming singing, becoming a low, rhythmic sound that none of them could identify and none of them wanted to think about too hard. And it happened every night, without fail, between midnight and the first light of morning. And then, silence. And then, hours later, Mia's door opening and Mia leaving for university, looking exhausted and confused and completely unaware. Her neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, a woman in her 60s who had known Mia since she moved into the building, stopped her in the hallway one morning. "Sweetheart," she said carefully, "are you all right? At night?" Mia looked at her. "What about at night?" Mrs. Thompson studied the girl's face. The dark circles under her eyes had become deep, purple-brown shadows that looked almost like bruises. Her cheekbones were more prominent than they had been. She had lost weight. "Nothing," Mrs. Thompson said gently. "Just take care of yourself." Mia nodded and went to university. Mrs. Thompson watched her go and then went back inside and sat in her kitchen and prayed. By the 6th week, Mia had stopped eating. Not deliberately, not as a choice she made consciously. She simply forgot. Food stopped registering as something necessary. She would sit in front of a plate and look at it and feel nothing. No hunger, no appetite, no interest. She stopped drinking water the same way. Ethan noticed at their next meeting. He brought food, her favorite, a pasta dish from the restaurant she'd loved since their first date. She looked at it and then looked away. "You have to eat," he said. "I'm not hungry." "Mia, you're—" He stopped, looked at her carefully. "You've lost so much weight." She shrugged. He watched her for a long moment. Then he said, very carefully, "I'm scared for you." Something crossed Mia's face then, a flicker of the old Mia, the warm, laughing girl he'd fallen in love with. Her eyes filled. "I don't know what's happening to me," she whispered. "I feel like I'm disappearing." Ethan reached across the table and took her hands. Her hands were cold, much colder than they should have been. He held them tighter. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know what was wrong. He had no framework for this experience, no category in his practical, rational mind where this experience could fit. He drove home that evening and called Sarah. "I think it's getting worse. She's not eating. She looks—" He stopped. "Sarah, she looks like a different person." Sarah's voice was soft, sympathetic. "Have you thought about taking her to see someone, like a therapist maybe? It sounds psychological." Ethan was quiet. "Yeah, maybe." He hung up. Sarah set her phone down. She felt nothing. That, perhaps, was the most frightening thing about her. 7 weeks after Sarah's visit to the old city, Ethan decided he needed to see Mia in person. He called Sarah and asked if she wanted to come. Sarah said yes immediately. They drove together. Sarah sat in the passenger seat and asked questions about Mia in a voice full of concern, and Ethan answered them and didn't notice the way Sarah's hands rested in her lap, very still, very controlled. Mia's door took a long time to open. When it did, Ethan's breath caught. He had thought he was prepared. He wasn't. Mia stood in the doorway, and she was almost unrecognizable. Her scalp was completely bare now, every strand of hair gone. The skin across the top of her head was a map of wounds, old scabs and new cuts layered over each other. Her face was gaunt. Her eyes, those dark, warm eyes he had loved since the first day he met her, was sunk deep into bruised hollows. She was wearing a loose shirt, and on her arms, visible below the sleeves, were marks, long, thin marks, red and raw, running along her forearms in patterns that made no sense as accidents. Ethan stepped forward. "Mia!" She stepped back, not in fear of him, in shame. She pulled her sleeves down. "I don't know where they came from," she said. Her voice was different, quieter, like something was pressing it down. Ethan turned to Sarah. Sarah was looking at Mia. Her expression was arranged perfectly. Shock, concern, sympathy, every feature in exactly the right position. But her eyes, for just one moment, just a fraction of a second, her eyes were wrong, not concerned, satisfied. Ethan didn't catch it. He was looking at Mia, but Mia caught it. In the fog of whatever was happening to her, in the exhaustion and the confusion and the pain, something in Mia's mind registered Sarah's expression in that unguarded moment. She didn't understand what she had seen, not yet, but something inside her went very, very still. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in the dark and thought about Mia's arms, about her scalp, about the medical reports that said normal, 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 when nothing about this was normal. He thought about his grandmother. His grandmother had been a deeply traditional woman, a woman who believed in things that Ethan had always quietly dismissed. Curses, dark magic, the evil eye. He had never believed in any of it. He believed in science, in medicine, in rational explanation. But science looked at Mia and said, normal, and normal didn't explain what he had seen today. At 2 a.m., he picked up his phone and called a number he hadn't called in 2 years. Father Emmanuel was not exactly a priest in the conventional sense. He was an old man, 70s perhaps older, who had spent decades working in communities where the boundary between the spiritual and the physical was treated as more permeable than modern medicine acknowledged. He had seen things. He did not dismiss things. He answered on the second ring despite the hour. Ethan talked for 20 minutes. Father Emmanuel listened without interrupting. When Ethan finished, the old man was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want to see her. You think you know what this is?" "I think," Father Emmanuel said carefully, "that there are conditions which do not show up in blood tests, and I think your friend needs to be seen by someone who looks for different things than doctors look for." They arranged it for the following afternoon. Mia opened the door when they arrived. Father Emmanuel stepped inside. He stopped. He stood in Mia's small entrance hallway, and he simply stopped. The way a person stops when they walk into a room and feels something the rest of the party hasn't noticed yet. He looked at Mia for a long time, not at her wounds or her bare scalp or the shadows under her eyes, though he saw all of those things. He looked at her. Then he turned to Ethan and said very quietly, "Step outside for a moment." Ethan hesitated. "Please," the old man said. Ethan stepped out onto the landing. Father Emmanuel turned back to Mia. "How long?" he asked. Mia frowned. "How long what?" "How long since this started?" "About 7 weeks." The old man nodded slowly. He walked around the small flat without touching anything, moving through the living room, the kitchen, back to the bedroom. He came back to Mia. "Someone did this to you," he said, simply, directly. Mia stared at him. "What?" "Someone who knows you, someone close to you." He paused. "Someone who gave something of yours, a photograph perhaps, to a person who should not have had it." The room was very quiet. Mia's mind went somewhere it had been trying not to go since that moment in the doorway, since that fraction of a second when she had caught Sarah's eyes and seen something that wasn't concern. "How do I make it stop?" she whispered. Father Emmanuel looked at her sadly. "We need time," he said. "A few days. There are things that must be done carefully. If we move too quickly—" He stopped. He looked at Mia's face, really looked at it, and something shifted in his expression. "Are you all right now, in this moment? Are you feeling all right?" Mia looked back at him. "I feel very tired," she said. "I need you to promise me something," the old man said. He leaned forward. "I need you to promise me that tonight you will not be alone. Can someone stay with you?" Mia was quiet. "I'll be fine," she said. Father Emmanuel looked at her for a long moment. "Promise me," he said again. "I'll be fine," she said again. It was the last thing she ever said to him. That same night, Sarah made a phone call. She had seen Father Emmanuel arrive at Mia's building from her car. She had driven past, watching, keeping track of things the way she had kept track of everything for 7 weeks. She didn't know exactly who the old man was, but she knew what he was there for, and she knew she was running out of time. She called the old man in the narrow streets of the old city. "Finish it," she said. A silence on the other end. "Finish it how?" the old man asked. Sarah closed her eyes. "All the way," she said. She hung up. She told herself she hadn't just done what she had just done. She told herself a lot of things that night. In Mia's flat, the clock moved toward midnight. Mia sat on her bed. She had tried to sleep. She couldn't. She felt strange tonight, stranger than usual, a buzzing in her head, a restlessness in her hands that she couldn't settle. At midnight she got up. She walked through the flat, kitchen, living room, back to the bedroom. Then she opened the front door. She climbed the stairs. She pushed open the door to the roof. The night air hit her, cold, sharp. The city spread out below her in lights and darkness. She stood at the edge of the roof and looked down. Somewhere below her, Mrs. Thompson's light was on, a television flickering behind curtains. Somewhere across the city, Ethan was sleeping. Somewhere in a room Mia would never see, Sarah was awake, waiting. Mia stood at the edge of the roof. In her hand, she didn't remember picking it up, didn't know when it had come to be in her hand, was a hairpin, one of the long decorative kind with a sharp pointed end. She raised it. She pressed the point against her own eye. She didn't feel it as pain. She felt it as relief, as ending, as the only door she could find in the dark. And then she stepped forward. The city continued below, lights and darkness and the sound of distant traffic. Mrs. Thompson turned off her television at 12:30 a.m. and went to bed. Ethan's phone on his bedside table showed no notifications, and on the roof of a building in the city, a girl who loved too openly in a world where not everyone who smiles at you wishes you well, was gone. The sun came up the way it always does, indifferent, reliable, without comment. Mrs. Thompson opened her door at 7 a.m. to collect her newspaper and found the building's other residents already gathered in the small courtyard below. She looked down. She understood immediately. She went back inside. She sat in her kitchen. She did not cry. She had lived long enough to know that some griefs are too large for tears in the first moment. They sit in you like stones. You carry them until you can put them down, and sometimes you never put them down. She thought about the last time she had seen Mia, the hallway, the dark circles, the question she had not asked directly. She thought about all the small moments that had seemed like nothing and now seemed like everything. Ethan arrived at 9 a.m. Someone had called him. He didn't remember afterward who. He stood in the courtyard and looked at the place where Mia had fallen, and something inside him went very quiet, the way a building goes quiet before it collapses. Everything still, everything holding itself together for one last moment. Sarah arrived at 9:30. She stood beside Ethan. She took his hand. She said all the right things. Father Emmanuel heard the news by mid-morning. He sat in his small office for a long time. Then he made some calls. He was a man who had spent decades watching things operate in shadows, things that preferred not to be named or examined or brought into the light. He had learned over those decades that the people who used such things rarely understood what they were truly inviting. They thought they were picking up a tool. They didn't realize the tool was also picking them up. He began asking questions, quietly, carefully, in the places where such questions could be asked. It took him 3 weeks, but he found the thread, and the thread led him inevitably to Sarah. He did not go to the police. What he knew could not be explained to police. What he knew lived in a space between the world that could be documented and the world that could not. Instead, he went to Sarah's family. He sat with her parents, bewildered, frightened people who had no idea what their daughter had done, and he told them what he knew. And then he told them what was coming, because that was the other thing about the old man in the narrow streets of the old city. He did not offer one-sided arrangements. What had been done to Mia required a price. Sarah had paid that price, but the arrangement didn't end with Mia's death. The arrangement continued. It started on a Thursday. Sarah woke at 2 a.m. She didn't know why. She got up, walked to her dressing table, sat down, picked up her comb, and started combing her hair. Mia Collins was buried on a Thursday morning in March. The sun was out. Someone brought flowers, yellow ones, which had been her favorite. People said kind things, the right things, the expected things. Ethan stood at the graveside and said nothing. He had stopped speaking much after. He had started asking questions instead, quiet, careful questions that led him to uncomfortable places. Questions about the weeks before Mia's decline, about who had been close to her, about what he might have missed. He never found proof. He never found the kind of proof that could be handed to anyone official and acted upon. But he found enough. He found enough to understand what had happened, and he found enough to understand who had made it happen. He never spoke to Sarah again. He never explained why. He simply stopped. Sarah noticed. Sarah tried to reach him, texts, calls, showing up at places he frequented. He was always somewhere else. She told herself he was grieving, that he would come back to her eventually, that this was exactly what she had wanted. Mia gone, Ethan available, and now she just had to be patient. She told herself that. At night, in the dark, between midnight and dawn, she combed her hair. Faster each night, harder each night.
the comb pressing down with a pressure she couldn't seem to control. And in the mornings she woke with her pillow covered in dark strands and no memory of the night at all. Mrs. Thompson still lives in the same building. She lights a candle on the anniversary. She doesn't talk about what she heard those nights, the laughing, the singing, the sounds that didn't quite sound like Mia and didn't quite sound like anything else either. She prays instead. Father Emmanuel retired from his work 2 years after Mia's death. He had seen enough, he said. He had learned over many decades that there were things in the world that operated beyond the reach of intervention, things that found their own balance eventually, in their own time. He found some comfort in that. Some. Ethan moved to another city. He doesn't talk about Mia, but sometimes late at night, he takes out his phone and looks at old photographs. Mia laughing at their favorite restaurant. Mia reading on his couch, one foot tucked beneath her. Mia at a university event, dark eyes, bright smile, completely unaware of who else was in the room, completely unaware of who was watching. He puts the phone away. He turns off the light, and in the dark, he thinks about something Father Emmanuel said to him the last time they spoke. Envy, the old man had said quietly, is the only sin that gives the sinner no pleasure whatsoever. Every other darkness at least offers something to the person who chooses it. Envy offers nothing, it only takes. He paused, and it never takes only from its target. He thinks about that. In another part of the city, Sarah is awake. She is sitting at her dressing table. It is 2:47 a.m. She is combing her hair. She doesn't know why she can't stop. She doesn't know why the comb keeps pressing harder. She doesn't know why, when she looks in the mirror, just for a moment, the reflection looking back at her isn't quite her own. Some prices once paid keep being collected, long after the transaction is forgotten, long after the one who made the deal has convinced themselves it's over. It is never over. Sleep well.